Today we have a member selected paint up for the Mad Hatter from Wonderland's War. And while this will be a full painting tutorial, I'm going to begin with the purple OSL and give a little more attention to that aspect of the painting. Welcome to Treehane Miniatures. I haven't done a proper purple OSL video since painting Cthulhu almost 2 years ago, and that was my first attempt at a purple OSL. My approach then was to use a standard layering method to increase the brightness of the OSL. I used Vallejo purple to establish the base for the OSL, then I added titanium white to the purple to create brighter layers on top of the purple base. I'm trying something a bit different and much easier today. I have produced some cheating Rattlecan purple OSL videos since painting Cthulhu, but I want something a little more refined for the Mad Hatter. I'm starting with a black primer. Then I coat the entire miniature with Dark Plum Pro Acryl. Pro Acryl does make a dark purple primer now, which I'll definitely try on an upcoming model. Or maybe it's a model you've already seen since I don't necessarily upload these in the order that I paint them. As it stands, I really like how painting dark plum over a black primer produces a very dark violet starting point for our project. I'm mixing up Pro Acryl Royal Purple with some airbrush thinner, which I'll run through my airbrush to establish the base for the OSL. I find that using an airbrush is the easiest way to map out where the OSL would affect the model. There are other ways to do this, such as dry brushing, using a standard paintbrush, or using a Rattlecan spray paint. The airbrush is the best balance of speed and precision, in my opinion. Primarily, I use the airbrush because I don't have to worry about the light placement. I simply spray the paint from the direction of the light source and it magically hits the features of the model just as the light would. If you're confident in your light placement, you could use a standard brush instead, but it will take a little longer. If dry brushing, you'll want to dry brush in a single direction, pulling your strokes away from the light source. Whichever method you decide to start with, we're simply mapping out the locations where light would hit the model, rather than trying to achieve full opacity. We'll intensify the glow in the following steps. Now I increase the opacity of the purple hue within the established purple foundation. I keep these additional strokes well within the perimeter that we created with the airbrush. This way, the purple light naturally fades out into the surrounding areas. I've made a video demonstrating the various ways to paint OSL on a miniature. I'll link to that video at the end of this video and in the description below. The very first step is the only difference between the various methods. From this step forward, it's all the same. Next, I use titanium white to highlight the features that would be affected most by the light source. This includes almost all of the edges as well as any large smooth surfaces that are directly facing the imagined purple light. Finally, I use fluorescent purple to paint over the white highlights. Fluorescent paint is very translucent, so there isn't much need to thin it. I also paint a little way into the royal purple area to create a transition from these brighter highlights to the intermediate royal purple color. This fluorescent purple is so translucent that it actually has very little effect when painted over the royal purple, but every little bit helps. This wraps up the purple OSL on the Mad Hatter. Now we just have to paint the other half of the model. I'll cover the boring stuff like his suit pretty quickly and spend a little more time on key features like his skin. I'm using a gradient of gray paints from Duncan Rhodes 2 Thin Coats for the suit. Even though the suit should read as black when we're all done, I don't really like using pure black paint on my miniatures. I'm using a very dark charcoal gray paint for the base layer of the suit. When painting near the purple OSL, I leave a small amount of dark plum between this dark gray paint and the OSL that we just painted. From here, I need to create some gray highlights for the black suit. I need to be careful with the size of these highlights. If I make the highlights too large, the suit may look like it's gray with black shadows, instead of looking like a black suit with gray highlights. Therefore, I'm only covering about 25 to 30% of the total surface area with these highlights. This initial highlight color is still a fairly dark gray that works as a nice transition from the Death Reaper base coat. That initial highlight is the most stressful part of painting the suit because that's when we have to decide exactly where to place the highlights and decide how large to make them. Now that that's done, I simply take a slightly lighter gray color and place it within our existing highlight shapes. Then I repeat the step one more time with a final highlight of Que-Tang Gray. As these grays get lighter, they are more prone to having a chalky finish. If this happens, I like to use one of the previous darker colors such as Death Reaper to glaze over them and smooth things out. Keep in mind that these darker colors should be thinned significantly with water when doing this, so the highlights are still visible. While I have Que-Tang Gray on my palette, I decide to base coat the Mad Hatter's right eyeball. I like to avoid using pure white for the whites of the eyes. Now I figure I'll take a small break and paint the price tag on the Hatter's hat. Trying to accomplish this with a fine tip brush was a bit stressful for me, so much so that I got my fat noggin in the shot. So I subsequently switched to a fine tipped black pen to detail the price of the 10 shillings 6 pence. This was much easier. Now we're back to royal purple for the vest, tie, cummerbund, and hatband. I'm no fashion expert, but I'm pretty sure that a suit should either have a vest or a cummerbund, but not both. I'm base coating all of these items the same, but I'll highlight them two different ways. The tie and vest I highlight with a simple application of royal purple and pale yellow. I usually start with a 50-50 mix when creating highlight colors and then adjust it to get the exact color I'm looking for. I use Vallejo purple to hit the raised folds of the cummerbund and hatband. Then I use a mix of purple and pale yellow to further highlight the hatband and cummerbund. Alright, let's create the Hatter's iris using a little bright pale green. In the game art, the Hatter is looking up and to his right. Therefore, I'll paint the iris in the upper left portion of the eye as we're looking at it. I use Death Reaper to paint the pupil and encircle the iris, thereby separating it from the gray part of the eye. Skin is still one of my favorite things to paint. The dark plum that is already in place will be our deepest shadow color for the skin. I mix up a secondary shadow color using Dark Plum Pro Acryl and Elven Flesh by the Army Painter. It's a little difficult to see from this angle, but there is some flesh visible above the Hatter's right eye. I'll keep all of the skin above his eye in shadow, as if the brim of the hat is casting a shadow on his forehead. This is the brightest paint I'll apply to the upper part of his face. I also make sure to leave some of the original Dark Plum layer visible in the recesses. Next, I use first generation Army Painter Elven Flesh for the mid-tone color. I love the original Army Painter skin colors. They are so creamy. They don't tend to produce chalky finishes like flesh tones from other brands. Plus, their lack of opacity is perfect for my style of painting. I can gradually build up the opacity in several layers, covering a little less area with each layer. The result is smooth transitions without glazing. I should say it's perfect for this style of painting. If I'm speed painting, I prefer the single coat coverage of the Army Painter's Fanatic line. I jump straight to Pro Acryl Pale Yellow for the final highlight color. I dot this into place on prominent features such as the lips, nose, cheeks, and chin. Hair is pretty easy to paint. It's similar to painting non-metallic metal in that it uses large jumps in color value between coats. The main difference is that I don't take the highlights and shadows to the same extreme that I would with non-metallic metal. It's also less stressful because I don't worry about achieving smooth blends between the layers. After I have the dark base layer of Hull Red in place, I switch to Lava Orange for the mid-tone color. I typically highlight hair with bands of color that encircle the head. In other words, I'm not highlighting every protruding strand of hair from top to bottom. I highlight all strands of hair along a couple of bands around the head. This lava orange is translucent, so I build it up in a couple of layers. I use pale yellow for the final highlight. This is painted within the existing bands of orange. I like this yellow color, but it's looking a little too stark for me. I decide to glaze over it with a little lava orange to tone down the brightness just a touch. I'm using a series of 3 blue-gray colors to paint the teapot and the cup the Hatter is holding. This is very much like painting the Hatter's suit, but the complete opposite. Here, I want the highlights very large. The overall color of the teapot set should appear as a final color used in this progression, which is Glacier Blue. This means that with each new layer applied, I'll leave very little of the underlying darker layer visible. The final layer of Glacier Blue will cover a good 75% of the surface area of the teapot. I'm also using this same color progression to edge highlight the Hatter's sword, which he uses to slice and dice the fur for his felt hats. The final touch for the sword is to use titanium white to add little glints of light to the sharp edges. Alright, we're in the final stretch. All that's left to do is paint the copious amounts of pink tea pouring forth from his tiny cup. There are several steps, but they're all fast and easy. First, the tea gets a base coat of magenta pro-acryl. Then I add some very bright highlights with titanium white. These are placed very sparingly. I use pro-acryl fluorescent purple to darken the deep recesses running down the middle of the liquid flow, as well as some other shadow areas. I paint the white highlights within the fluorescent pink. Then I highlight within those highlights with a little more titanium white. Well, that wraps up painting the Mad Hatter from Wonderland's War. I'd like to thank my amazing channel members for supporting what I do on this channel. You too can become a channel member for as little as $1.99 per month using the link in the description below, and receive perks such as early access to videos, extended versions of our painting tutorials, and even a tier that lets you decide which miniature I paint next. Thank you so much for watching. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to join our growing community that still has its muchness.